Thank you. All right, there we go. So some of the emerging themes that we saw from last time, and hopefully you've got a good look at the screen. There were questions about the incentives, the state incentives as well as the local incentives that were used to attract Amazon, and that will, at least from the local side, be the essential thing that will be considered when the county board takes up the Amazon issue as early as February 23rd or perhaps soon thereafter. There were a lot of questions and concerns about the impact of roads, how cars move around primarily, and specifically traffic congestion and the availability of parking. But also, concerns were generally about mobility in general. So people had concerns about transit and whether transit was going to be sufficient to deal with the added influx of workers, whether or not Metro specifically was going to be up to the task of handling this new explosion of growth in the Crystal City and Pentagon City areas. A lot of concerns about housing. What does this mean for housing costs for people who already live here? What will it mean for people who are coming to work in our region as a result of this business investment? General concerns about the affordability of housing overall. New residents, existing residents, and people who have historically been challenged by the high cost of living in our area. A lot of questions and concerns about Amazon's business practices and whether or not that was something that the county board was aware of and whether there was any leverage that we had to change things that people felt were not consistent with our values. Issues about people who are going to work in constructing the facilities that serve Amazon and whether or not those workers would be fairly treated through fair wages, that these would be opportunities that would be available for people who are already here locally. There are questions about schools. We know that we've had a school enrollment growth conversation in Arlington for a number of years. People were wondering if we had a sense of what this was going to do in terms of impacting that. And then, you know, we've had some conversations over the last year specifically, but it's always really a part of the conversation in Arlington. What does this mean for the overall growth of our community? What does it mean in terms of density and the impact of density in our neighborhoods? And are we being mindful of looking at all of those things in advance so that we're not dealing with adverse consequences later? So those were just sort of the general themes that we heard. Lots of specific questions within it. We are not taking those off the table for today. We want to get deeper into it, but we did want to let you know what we've heard thus far. So at this point, I'd like to invite Christina Wynn from Arlington Economic Development to just give us a sense of how this all came together and where we are in terms of understandings about how Amazon's growth will move forward. So please welcome Christina Wynn.
All right. Good morning. So I am Christina Wynn, and first off, I am an Arlington resident, and 3 of my children do go to Arlington Public Schools. And I was the lead project manager in working with Amazon. Back in September of 2017, when the RFP came out, it was a public process. It was interesting because when we did work on economic development projects, usually it's very confidential and a company does not make their site selection searches known to the entire world. So when the RFP came out, one of the first things we did was look to say, okay, can Arlington, where would we propose a site in Arlington? We knew we had a vacancy problem, we had a lot of empty buildings, and so we looked at the Crystal City, Pentagon City area, and this area was really ideal because it was planned for not only transportation, but it was planned for future development. Many of you from the Crystal City neighborhoods actually had worked on the Crystal City sector plan and the Pentagon City phase development plan. And so here it was in Crystal City, we had 2 million square feet of vacant space already. And the whole area was planned for over 20 million square feet of development that's residential and commercial. In addition, we looked at the transportation and the systems. And so, Sarah and her team looked at the capacity in that transportation, metro, buses, and what we learned is that really metro was 20% down from during the week prior to its peak periods. And I believe the transportation folks had looked back, and it was back in, I think, was it 1986, that Pentagon City Metro was at the prior peak, and Crystal City was 2001. And so overall, our systems could handle this excess capacity, and our increased capacity if Amazon had chose us. And remember, back in September, we were actually evaluating 50,000 jobs and 8 million square feet, because that's what the actual scope of the project was back then. The other thing that we did that was really unique, and I think set us apart in the whole site selection process, is that we actually partnered with our friends down in Alexandria, because the transportation and the community planners had actually looked at that Crystal City, Pentagon City, and Potomac Yard area as one cohesive corridor. It all functions together. It has an amazing assets and infrastructure in terms of transportation with the airport and the rail and metro and the buses and the whole transit way. And so Potomac in Alexandria, they had about 10 million square feet of approved density. And so when we pitched Amazon, we actually said, here's what we called National Landing. I know nobody likes that name. I apologize, it was our doing. But it was the only way that we could communicate to Amazon, a very complicated area that consisted of 3 very distinct neighborhoods. But we told Amazon, we said, here's this amazing neighborhood that has assets and it can handle the development, it can handle these employees because this was there before. And we were agnostic. They could choose Alexandria or Arlington, and we would support either function or either path of growth. How many know about the vacancy problem in Arlington? Awesome. This is a slide that actually illustrates this. And so what happened back in 2005 with PrEC is that we lost a lot of jobs. 34,000 in all of Arlington County, and 25,000 in Crystal City alone. And so you think about it, Arlington is only primarily an office market. We have no manufacturing, we have no distribution. 1/5 of our office buildings were empty. We had almost 20%, 22% vacancy rate, and that translates, for every 1% of vacancy, that translated a loss of $3.4 million annually to the county. So with a 20% vacancy, you're talking a significant loss in commercial revenue. So let's talk about the pitch and how we actually put together the package from incentives. The biggest piece that we followed basically the state's lead, and the state had wanted to do something different in terms of incentives and say, okay, we are not going to offer Amazon a ton of money like New Jersey or Maryland did. What we want to do is invest in our community. And so a big piece of this was transportation. So Arlington and Alexandria together collectively put $570 million of transportation projects that were all already in our capital improvement program. And then the state offered $295 million to help us complete several key projects. And so those include the Crystal City Metro Station, the CC to DCA pedestrian bridge, enhancements to Route 1, the completion of the transit way coming from Alexandria, coming up through Pentagon City, down 12th Street, and out to Columbia Pike. And then in Alexandria, it was supporting the second entrance to the Potomac Yard Metro entrance. And so this whole package was working towards saying that, all right, while we know our transportation systems are under capacity and that we can handle riders, we also want to make this more efficient and really invest back into the community to ensure that we're not going to have any issues going forward. So when Amazon decided, and this was a very happy day to me, that they chose Arlington, we don't have a light, do we? A pointer? Bryna? Is there a pointer on this?
Is there a what?
A pointer.
A pointer? Okay. All right.
Even if there is, they're not going to be able to see it.
Oh, okay. All right.
All the slides are online, too.
All the slides are online. So if you're looking at the map, this is Pentagon City here, and that is Crystal City there. So those three bright yellow squares in Crystal City, that is the first locations. Those are existing buildings, and that is where Amazon is going to locate first. And that's about 500,000 square feet. They're going to start in 2019 to take some space in 241 18th Street. And there's going to be just minimal tenant improvements and renovations. Then they will move over to 1800 South Bell Street, where there's, again, just going to be minimal tenant improvements and renovations. And then from there, they'll go to 1770 Crystal Drive, which is the building that's got the big green draping on it. And that whole building will actually be renovated, and there'll be a new facade and so forth, and they will occupy that. And that is the existing square footage that they plan to occupy in Crystal City. From there, they actually come over to Pentagon City. And so you'll see Whole Foods and the Bartlett. The building south of that right now is industrial space, some warehouse space. So those buildings, which is known as Metz Park, are going to start to be constructed. And so they will start to occupy or build and construct those areas, and then from there move to the north side of the Bartlett, which is known as Penn Place, and build out a campus there. Everything else, the blue buildings are existing occupied or semi-occupied buildings owned by JBG, and the red buildings are ones that JBG has for future redevelopment and future plans. So, in terms of Amazon's anticipated path of growth, I'd probably say it was like maybe 3 weeks or a month before they made the announcement, we had been operating on the fact that we thought they were going to locate 50,000 jobs. And then they recognized that they really needed to split those headquarters. And so this is what the actual anticipated growth of jobs and square footage are. So again, 2019 is where you're going to have those 400 employees locating at 241 18th Street. And then slowly, over time, they're going to ramp up. And it's not until 2030 that they anticipate to get to 25,000 jobs in 4 million square feet, which is the development I just showed you on the map. All those yellow buildings is 4 million square feet and 25,000 jobs. If they continue to grow over time, then again, it would be at a little probably faster pace. The growth, in terms of Amazon, everybody always asks, ask, like, well, what is Amazon going to be bringing here? Like, what types of jobs? So it is a corporate headquarters, and it means that about 50% of the employees are going to be really in kind of the tech field, and then the rest of the employees are going to be corporate functions. So your legal, your HR, your finance, your administration. One of the things that Amazon does is they have each one of their business units are almost like little mini businesses themselves. And so each one of them has their own legal, marketing, finance, and administration. We don't know yet what actually focus this campus is going to have yet. Amazon is organically growing, so they're not going to be bringing people from Seattle or any of their, from the Boston or out from Herndon. It is going to be an organic growth in terms of their new sectors and their new opportunities that they really want to focus on that matches our workforce here in Arlington. So I talked a little bit about this with our transportation incentives, but this is a breakdown of when we looked at Arlington and Alexandria's proposed commitments. So $570 million was put towards transportation in those projects that I showed you on the previous map. $150 million combined between Arlington and Alexandria in new affordable and workforce housing in and around the neighborhoods associated with that area, which is about 2,000 units of housing. And then there's $28 million in what we call strategic investments in infrastructure. This is not a grant to Amazon. This is actually part of the existing tax increment finance district that actually exists in Crystal City, Pentagon City, and Potomac Yard. And basically, what we're doing is we're setting aside an incremental portion of the increased growth revenue from the property taxes associated with that tax increment district for projects that would actually benefit the Amazon employees. We're anticipating these are going to be things like in parks and open spaces and green spaces, which are all really important to Amazon and their employees, and so they want to ensure that we're going to be able to deliver on those types of projects. And so that $28 million is over a 10-year period. The only direct incentive, so everything else is 97% of what we proposed was investing back into you, into the community. Only 3% of the entire package that we won Amazon with is a direct incentive. And that is $23 million in transient occupancy tax. So Amazon anticipates, they have about, I think it was about 300,000 room nights in Seattle, meaning that their employees do so much traveling that they have generated over 300,000 room nights. So since we got half of their campus, because their campus in Seattle is about 46,000 people, we anticipated that they would generate anywhere from 100 to 150,000 room nights here in Arlington. And what we did is we said, okay, that incremental revenue above what we generate now from this tax, and the tax, just so you know, the tax is not paid by residents, it's paid by business travelers and visitors to the county. And we said the incremental tax over a 16-year period is we would put 15% of that incremental tax and give that to Amazon in an annual grant. And that we estimate to be about $23 million. If they don't generate that and they don't have the room nights that we projected, that's fine. That number goes lower. But it's a net benefit to the county because we're getting additional tax revenue from those business travelers. The other really big and super important piece of the overall incentive package was the state's investment into our tech talent pipeline. One of the things is that we're all concerned, and we hear from our businesses all the time about how, trying to hire workforce. And we recognize that while we have this amazing, robust, very highly educated workforce, it is hard for some of our corporations to find the talent. They do find it, it just takes a little bit longer, and they have to pay a little bit more money. And so what the state said was, we want to invest in our talent. It is the #1 asset that Virginia has, is our talent. And we want to make sure that when Amazon comes, that they're not going to deplete that. So what the state did was, said we're going to set aside $50 million to invest in K through 12 through all of Virginia. And this would be in STEM, related to STEM. And then we want to put help with internships. So in high schools and in college is being able to increase the number of internships so that our students can get more experience and be prepared for the workforce. The other big piece of it is over $1 billion in education at the higher ed. And so that includes bachelor's degrees, community college, and master's degrees. $375 million was set aside to a dollar-for-dollar matching grant for the Virginia Tech Innovation Campus. And the Virginia Tech Innovation Campus had decided to locate in Alexandria. So when we teamed up to offer this joint site, Arlington got Amazon, and then Alexandria got the Virginia Tech Innovation Campus. And so they're going to be building a new campus focused on computer science and related fields. It's a over $1 billion campus. They expect to be operational probably in about 2025. And they anticipate that they're going to generate 750 new bachelor's degrees and about 150 master's degrees on that campus, which will be a huge catalyst for our region in increasing the tech pipeline. Part of that $375 million goes to our own George Mason here in Virginia Square. They also have the opportunity for a dollar-for-dollar matching grant to increase their programs in computer science, entrepreneurship, and innovation. So again, Arlington got additional investment from the state through this program. The other big piece of this, which as a mother who has 3 children that are going to be going to college and I hope go to Virginia schools, is that the state has set up this talent investment fund, and they're in the process right now, and they're working out the details of it. But all universities in Virginia will be able to apply to this tech talent investment fund to get funding for capital improvements, student enrollment, and faculty capacity and recruitment. And so the universities benefit, which actually benefit all businesses. So the state didn't set this up just for Amazon. This benefits every business in Virginia. And this was very unique and not, if you look at New York, they did not do anything nearly like this. So what does it mean to Arlington? So we talked about the loss of 34,000 jobs. So this will help to mitigate that loss. It also diversifies our economy. We have been trying since BRAC to get away from the federal jobs and the federal recruitment and the dependency on our federal tenants. And this goes, we got Lidl, and then we got Nestle, and now we have Amazon. And so we're continuing to really decrease that dependence on the federal government. It also goes a long way in helping us realize our 10-year CIP plan and the realization of the Crystal City Sector Plan. As I said, 95% of this is investing into the community. Only 5% is, when we look at Arlington alone, it's 95%. And Arlington is going to get $172 million we're projected to get in cumulative revenue by that 2030. So when we reach 4 million square feet, 25,000 jobs, and over 315 million beyond that, and then especially if Amazon continues to grow. And so when you look at the revenue to what we provided in incentive, it's a 14-to-1 return on local investment. Lastly, because I was talking about incentives, so what is happening right now is we have provided a proposal to Amazon. Nobody agreed to anything, and that outlined those pieces. What we're right now doing is working on the performance agreement, which is the legal contract that would come forward to our board no earlier than February, that outlines the terms of the TOT and the strategic investments in infrastructure. And so what that performance agreement will be is it'll be a 16-year contract with the incentive actually being paid out over 15 years. I know that sounds a little weird, but because Arlington does pay for performance, meaning we don't pay a company first, we actually make them perform first, and then we pay them. So they have to actually be here a year and start to generate revenue, and then they report, they provide a notarized affidavit and other documentation, and then if they've done what they were supposed to do, then we pay them a year after. And so the whole performance period is 16 years, but we only pay them for 15. The company will have to achieve those annual square footage, so when we talk about, when we look at that ramp up on that chart, every year, what that number is what Amazon will actually have to achieve. So it'll say, you need to occupy X million square feet in 2023. And we check that by them providing annual reporting and a notarized affidavit, as well as certificates of occupancy, so that we can verify and ensure that they've actually done what they were supposed to do. And the performance agreement will, as I said, include the TOT. The terms of that have all been in the different materials on the website, which includes how the tax would actually, how the grant would be calculated, and what those terms are if they don't meet that, meaning like if they do not achieve the square footage, then how does the grant doesn't get paid out, because as I said, it was paid for performance. This presentation, and there's actually about 50 slides that go along with this, but I know everybody's anxious to want to hear from you, is on the Arlington va.us/Amazon website. It's called Amazon 101. So I encourage you to go back, because I did a high level at all these pieces, but there are numerous slides on each one of these topics that you can dig into. And we continue to update it and provide more information as we've heard from the community, so that we're answering your questions.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Ms. Nguyen. So with that level setting, we're going to move into our conversation. I'd ask, just so that we can have a productive, efficient conversation, that we follow a couple of guidelines. Our goal today is to hear from as many voices as possible in the room. We do have a big crowd, so in order to do that, I'd ask that you all be thoughtful with the amount of time that you use to share your perspectives, and that as we're going around, if you have an opportunity, or if what you wanted to say has been said by someone else, we certainly don't want to, not have you speak, but we'd ask that you be as succinct as possible if your thoughts have already been articulated in some other form. And you may hear some things that you vociferously agree with, and we'd ask that instead of taking the opportunity to clap, which sort of slows us down a little bit, that you do the silent applause that is notable in the Quaker community or the sign language community, which is just simply to do that. We very much appreciate it. It will allow us to get to as many different people as possible. And as much as this is an opportunity for the board to hear the perspectives of people in our community, this is also an opportunity for you to hear from others as well. So in addition to whatever comments or questions you're wanting to ask this morning, please keep both ears open so that you can hear the perspectives of others. Before we begin, are there any questions about anything that you sort of heard in the slide presentation or anything that we can clear up right away? Yes?
Good morning. I have a question about the amount of square footage. So we have a 20% vacancy. Good morning, thank you. I have a question about the office vacancy rate and the square footage that's currently available and what's in the pipeline. So we have a 20% vacancy, right? It's about
A little less, 17 and a half.
Okay. So
we're doing better.
There's about 42 million square feet in the county, I think, of rentable business building area. My data online is correct. So that means that Amazon at full build out of 8 million square feet would occupy that hole that we have in our vacancy right now. Is that correct?
Well, they're not planning on 8. They're planning on 4 with a potential growth path, at least through incentives that would take them a little over 6.
Okay. So I'm also wondering what's currently in the pipeline now to be built in the county. So.
You mean what's going through the application process?
Right.
All right. So
yeah,
what we'll make sure is if we can. That's a specific question that we'll make sure if we have someone who's here, Alex, if you can sort of figure that out, that would be great, or Richard actually. But if not, we can make sure that's something that we follow up with later on. Any specific questions before we move on to a broader one? Ms. O'Connor.
Could I just ask that when people speak, that they identify where in Arlington or elsewhere they live?
That's certainly fine. If you all would do that, I think it would just help so people can get a sense of who's in the room. That would be terrific if everybody could do that.
There's 2,000 units for affordable and workforce housing. Is it new units or it's renovated old units? Is it additional new units?
So the incentive thus far just is what Arlington and Alexandria. It's a translation of the money that we're going to put into affordable housing. So it could be new units, it could be preservation of existing units. That is not specifically defined at this point. All right, so any other quick questions before we move into a broader conversation? Yes, sir.
Real quick, could I get the URL for the slide pack again, please?
Sure, it's arlingtonva.us/Amazon, and on that page you are going to look for something that says Amazon 101.
It's on, if you go 2 slides, you can put it up on the screen.
And there's a link on the county homepage too. If you forget that, there's a link on the county homepage.
Good thing I was correct. All right, beautiful. All right.
Hi, I'm Andrew Pitts. I'm in Columbia Pike Corridor. Looking at your number, this is a follow-up to this question. You have $150 million for 2,000 units. My math says that's $75,000 a unit. I don't think there's a $75,000 unit for sale anywhere in Arlington right now. I'm just curious what the basis of that is.
So this is part of large. I'll take your point about is that going to actually leverage the units that we desire. That's just the amount that a subsidy would be put into a larger housing deal. So it's not to say that the unit only costs that. It's what the subsidy would be required to create that unit of affordability. Okay, so I think we're going to quickly move into larger thoughts and perspectives, which is exactly what we want to do.